Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Tirye Nashtaprayeshu Avadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. So continuing with the discussion on Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita by Satsvarup Das Goswami, Volume 2, Planting the Seed, New York City, 1965 to 1966. Today we're starting new chapter, chapter 15. It will not be possible to assist you. So Prabhupada has written to Sumati Morarji for purchasing a building in Manhattan, New York, to establish a center there. So Sumati Morarji wrote to him, I have come here in this, from a letter to Sumati Morarji, I have come here in this old age, neither for sightseeing nor for any personal interest. It is for the interest of the entire humanity that I am trying to implement the science of Krishna, which will actually make them happy. So it's a duty of every devotee of Lord Krishna to help me by all means. November passed and December came. So Prabhupada, having obtained an extension on his visa, stayed on. Just imagine if Prabhupada hadn't extended his visa and came back to India. Where would we be? America seemed so opulent, yet many things were difficult to tolerate. The sirens and bells from fire engines and police cars seemed like they would crack his heart. Sometimes at night he would hear a person being attacked and crying for help. From his first days in the city, he had noted that the smell of dog stool was everywhere. And although it was such a rich city, he could rarely find a mango to purchase. And if he did, it was very expensive and usually had no taste. From his room, he would sometimes hear the horns of ocean liners, and he would dream that someday he would sail around the world with a Sankirtan party, preaching in all the major cities of the world. The weather went below freezing, colder than he had ever experienced in India. Obviously, New York gets very cold. Daily he had to walk towards the Hudson against a west wind that even on an ordinary winter's day would take your breath away and make your eyes water and your face grow numb. On a stormy day, the driving wind and sudden gusts could even knock a man down. Sometimes a cold rain would turn the streets slick with ice. The cold would become especially severe as one approached the shelterless, windswept area of West Side Drive, where occasional whirlwinds carried brown leaves and paper trash mysteriously high into the air. And it is truth, actually. This is how New York weather is. Srila Prabhupada wore a coat Dr. Mishra had given him, but he never gave up wearing his dhoti, despite the cold, windy walks. Swami Nikhilananda of the Ramakrishna Mission had advised Prabhupada that if he wanted to stay in the West, he should abandon his traditional Indian dress and strict vegetarianism. Meat eating and liquor, as well as pants and coat, were almost a necessity in this climate, he had said. And not just this, person I met in Vrindavan last time, he was telling me, because he was a little poor, he didn't have lots of money. So somebody was offering him to come to Germany and become a priest in a temple there. So I asked him, so what else he has told you? He said, but one thing they told me that if I come to Germany, because it's so cold, that I have to drink alcohol, because otherwise I cannot survive. I said, this is not correct, because they must be having the desire to drink alcohol, so they are drinking because they want to drink. I said, in America also, in America, Russia, Germany, the ISKCON devotees are everywhere. They don't drink liquor, they don't drink alcohol. But he said, oh, that host is saying you have to drink, and that's why I'm not thinking of going. I said, well, Radharani doesn't want you to go, so don't go. But this is just an excuse. And Prabhupada, look at his age. He never had something like this. Before Prabhupada had left India, one of his god brothers had demonstrated to him how he should eat in the West with a knife and fork. But Prabhupada never considered taking on Western ways. His advisors cautioned him not to remain an alien, but to get into the spirit of American life, even if it meant breaking vows he had held in India. Almost all Indian immigrants compromise their old ways. But Prabhupada's idea was different, and he could not be budged. The others may have had to compromise, he thought, but they had come to beg technological knowledge from the West. I have not come to beg something, he said, but to give something. In his solitary wanderings, Srila Prabhupada made acquaintances with a number of local people. There was Mr. Reuben, a Turkish Jew, who worked as a New York City subway conductor. Mr. Reuben met Prabhupada on a park bench, and being a sociable fellow and a world traveler, sat and talked with the Indian holy man. Mr. Reuben, he seemed to know that he would have temples filled up with devotees. He would look out and say, I'm not a poor man, I'm rich. There are temples in books, they are existing, they are there, but the time is separating us from them. He always mentioned we and spoke about the one who sent him, his spiritual master. He didn't know people at that time, but he said, I'm never alone. He always looked like a lonely man to me. That's what made me think of him like a holy man. Elijah, who always went out alone. I don't believe he had any followers. When the weather was not rainy or icy, Prabhupada would catch the bus to Grand Central Station and visit the Central Library on 42nd Street. His Srimad Bhagavatams were there. Some of the same volumes he had sold to the US Embassy in New Delhi, and he took pleasure in seeing them listed in the card catalog and learning that they were being regularly checked out and read. He would sometimes walk through UN Plaza or walk up to New India House on 64th Street, where he had met Mr. Malhotra, a consulate officer. It was through Mr. Malhotra that he had contacted the Tagore Society and had secured an invitation to lecture before one of the meetings back in November. Riding the bus down Fifth Avenue, he would look out at the buildings and imagine that someday they could be used in Krishna consciousness. He would take a special interest in certain buildings. One on 23rd Street and one with a dome on 14th Street attracted his attention. He would think of how the materialists had constructed such elaborate buildings and yet had made no provisions for spiritual life. Despite all the great achievements of technology, the people felt empty and useless. They had built these great buildings, but the children were going to LSD. LSD was a drug. And hippies were very fond of it. December 2nd, New York Times headlines, New York City hospitals report marked rise in LSD cases admitted for care. Protest against US participation in Vietnam War mounts. The weather grew cold, but there were no snow in December. On Columbus Avenue, shops were selling Christmas trees, and the continental restaurants were bright with holiday lighting. On 72nd, the Retailers Association erected tall red poles topped with green tinsel Christmas trees. The top of the trees on both sides of the street sprouted tinsel garlands that spanned the street and joined in red tinsel stars surrounded by colored lights. Although Srila Prabhupada did no Christmas shopping, he visited many bookstores, Orientalia, Samwiser's, Doubleday, the Paragon, and others, trying to sell his Srimad Bhagavatams. Mr. Ferber, the wife of the Paragon Book Gallery proprietor, considered Prabhupada a pleasant and extremely polite gentleman. The first time he called, she wasn't interested in his books, but he tried again and she took several volumes. Prabhupada used to stop by about once a week, and since his books were selling regularly, he would collect. Sometimes when he needed copies to sell personally, he would come by and pick them up from Mr. Ferber And sometimes he would phone to ask her how his books were selling. Mr. Farber. Every time he came, he would ask for a glass of water. If a customer would make such a request, I would ordinarily say there is a water cooler. But because he was an old man, I could tell him that. I could not tell him that, of course. He was very polite, always very modest, and a great scholar. So whenever he would ask, I would fetch him a cup of water personally. So somehow Prabhupada used her in the service, and definitely she would benefit. Once Prabhupada was talking with Mrs. Ferber about Indian cuisine, and she mentioned that she especially liked samosas. The next time he paid her a visit, he brought a tray of samosas, which she enjoyed. And Prabhupada himself cooked them. Harvey Cohen came often to room 501 to visit the Swami who had so impressed him at Anand Ashram. Harvey. The room he occupied was a tiny office in the back of the Yoga Society in uptown Manhattan. I began to go there regularly, and we sat facing each other on the floor in this little office with his typewriter and a new tape recorder on top of two suitcases. And there was a box of books he had brought from India and a color reproduction of dancing figures, which he looked at after. I told Swami Bhaktivedanta that I was an artist, and he asked me to please paint the picture of the dancers, which he explained was of Lord Chaitanya and his disciples. The painting was called Sankirtan. Whenever I came to visit him, Swami would always be happy to see me. I told him about myself, and we chanted Hare Krishna together in his room many nights that winter. I would get the train uptown from my apartment to go see him. January 11, 1966. Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri died of a heart attack while visiting Russia. The Prime Minister had been a personal acquaintance of Srila Prabhupada in India and an admirer of his Srimad Bhagavatam translation. He had been scheduled to visit America, and Prabhupada had expected to obtain a personal sanction from him for the release of funds from India. His untimely death was a great upset in Srila Prabhupada's plans to purchase the building at 143 West 72nd Street. The realtors had shown him the building, and he had already mentally designed the interior for deity worship and distribution of prasadam. The money was to come from India, and Prime Minister Shastri was to give personal sanction for the release of the funds. But suddenly, that was all changed. January 14th. Prabhupada decided to write to the owner of the building, Mr. A.M. Hartman. He explained how his plans had been upset, and he posed a new plan. Now the Prime Minister, Mr. Lal Bahadur Shastri, is suddenly dead. I am greatly perplexed, as there is no great difficulty for getting money from India. I am requesting you to allow me to use the place for the International Institution for God Consciousness, at least for some time. The house is laying vacant for so many days without any use, and I learned that you are paying the taxes, insurance, and other charges for the house, although you have no income from there. If you, however, allow this place for this public institution, you shall at least save the taxes and other charges which you are paying now for nothing. If I can start the institution immediately, certainly I shall be able to get sympathy locally, and in that case, I might not be required to get money from India. I'm also requesting that Your Honor become one of the directors of this public institution, because you will give a place to start the institution. Of course, this logic doesn't work in India. Oh, it doesn't work in America. A.M. Hartman wasn't interested. On the same day, he wrote Mr. Hartman, Prabhupada received a letter from Sir Padmapat Singhania, the director of the very large JK organization in India. Prabhupada had written Sir Padmapat ji for financial support, and his reply gave him hope. Not only was the Singhania family fabulously wealthy, but its members were devotees of Lord Krishna. So I believe he is from Kanpur. But let's see. My dear Swamiji, I have gone through your letter, and I'm very glad to note your idea of erecting a Sri Radha Krishna temple in New York. I think the proposal is a good one. But the following are the difficulties. One, we have got to send foreign exchange for building the temple for which government sanction is required. Without the government sanction, no money can be sent abroad. If the government of India agrees, then one can think of erecting it the temple in New York. Second, I doubt whether this small amount of rupees 7 lakhs, $110,000, wow, that was the exchange rate at that time. A temple can be built in New York. I meant to carry out a nice construction with Indian type of architecture. To get a temple completed in Indian type of architecture, we have to send a man from India. So these are the two main difficulties. Otherwise, your idea is very good. Srila Prabhupada and Mr. Singhania had a basic disagreement. A magnificent Indian temple in New York would cost millions of dollars to construct. Prabhupada knew, of course, that if Padmapada Singhania wanted, he could provide millions of dollars. But then how would they get so much money out of India? Prabhupada therefore again suggested that they spend only 7 lakhs. After purchasing the house, he wrote, we can build another story upon it with a temple dome, chakra, etc. Prabhupada had his own line of reasoning. Lord Dwarkadhish exhibited his opulence at Dwarka and with 16,000 queens, and it is understood that he built a palace for each and every queen. And the palaces were made with jewels and stones so that there was no necessity for artificial light in the palaces. So your conception of building a temple of Lord Krishna is in opulence. But we are residents of Vrindavan, and Vrindavan has no palaces like Dwarka. Vrindavan is full of forests and cows on the bank of the Jamuna. And Lord Krishna in his childhood played the part of a cowherd boy without any royal opulence, as you people, the inhabitants of Dwarka, are accustomed. So when the Dwarkavalas meet the Vrindavanvalas, there may be a via media. With Sir Padmapa's Dwarka-like wealth and Srila Prabhupada's Vrindavan-like devotion, Lord Krishna, the Lord of both Vrindavan and Dwarka, could be properly worshipped. So Prabhupada is trying every way possible. January 21st, he received Bon Maharaj's reply. 2 weeks before, Prabhupada had written to his godbrother, the director of the Institute of Oriental Philosophy in Vrindavan, that he had found a place for temple in New York, and that he wanted to install deities of Radha and Krishna. In his reply, Bon Maharaj quoted price estimates of 14-inch brass deities of Radha Krishna. But he also warned that to begin deity worship would be a very heavy responsibility. Srila Prabhupada responded, I think that after the temple has started, some men, even from America, may be available. As I see, they have at the Ramakrishna Mission as well, in so many yoga societies. So I'm trying to open a temple here because Srila Prabhupada or Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wanted it. Prabhupada also requested Bon Maharaj's assistance in getting the government to sanction release of the money he felt Padmapat Singhania would donate. He mentioned that he had carried on an extensive personal correspondence with the Vice President of India, Dr. Radhakrishnan, who was also known to Bon Maharaj. Tell him that it's not an ordinary temple of worship, but an international institution for God consciousness based on Srimad Bhagavatam. January 22nd, while Srila Prabhupada prayed to receive Radha Krishna in New York, a snowstorm hit the city. That morning, Srila Prabhupada, who had perhaps never before seen snow, woke and thought that someone had whitewashed the side of the building next door. Not until he went outside did he discover that it was snow. The temperature was 10 degrees. That is really cold. The city went into a state of emergency, but Prabhupada continued his daily walks. Now he had to walk through heavy snow, only a thin dhoti between his overcoat, his head covered with his Swami hat. The main roads were cleared, but many sidewalks were covered with snow. Although the strip of park dividing Broadway, the gusting winds piled snowbanks to shoulder height and buried the benches. The Broadway kiosks, plastered with layers of posters and notices, were now plastered with additional layers of snow and ice. But despite the weather, New Yorkers still walked with their dogs. The pets now wearing raincoats and mackinaws. I don't know what is mackinaw. Such pampering by American dog owners left Prabhupada with a feeling of surprised amusement. As he approached Western Avenue, he found the doormen blowing whistles to signal taxis as usual, but also scattering salt to melt the ice and create safe sidewalks in front of the buildings. In Riverside Park, the benches, pathways, and trees were glazed with ice and gave off a shimmering reflection from the sky. In the news, Selective Service officials announced the first substantial increase in the draft since the Korean War. A month-long peace ended with the US Air Force bombing North Vietnam. The New York transit strike ended after 3 weeks, and the transit labor leader died in the jail of a heart attack. So many things go on all over the world. I mean, this is actually to show there is no peace here in the material world. There can never be. There's only, I mean, temporary, some peace, some happiness here and there. But that's about it. January 30th. The East Coast was hit by severe blizzards. 7 inches of snow fell on the city with winds up to 50 miles an hour. The city of New York offered warm rooms and meals for people living in tenements without heat. JFK Airport was closed, as were train lines and roadways into the city. For the second time within 8 days, a state of emergency was declared because of snow. As a lone individual, Srila Prabhupada could not do anything about the snow emergency or the international warfare. He saw these as mere symptoms of the age of Kali. Always there would be misery in the material world. But if he could bring Radha and Krishna to a building in New York, nothing was impossible for the Supreme Lord. Even in the midst of Kali Yuga, a golden age could appear, and people could get relief. If Americans could take to Krishna consciousness, the whole world would follow. Seeing through the eyes of the scriptures, Srila Prabhupada pushed on through the blizzard and pursued the thin trail for support of his Krishna consciousness mission. February 4th. So somehow Prabhupada kept track of all this also, what he did on which day. He made a diary, he used to write everything in the diary. He wrote again to Tirth Maharaj, who had agreed to try for the government sanction if he first received written confirmation from a responsible donor pledging the funds for a temple. Prabhupada informed him that the donor would be Sir Padmapat Singhania, and he enclosed Mr. Singhania's favorable letter of the 14th. Prabhupada reminded his godbrother. Srila Prabhupada Bhakti Siddhanta wanted such temples in foreign cities like New York, London, Tokyo, etc. And I had personal talks with him when I first met him at Ulta Danga in 1922. Now here is a chance for me to carry out this transcendental order. I'm just seeking your favor and mercy in making this attempt successful. So he's really trying every way possible. So anyway, let's stop here, see anybody has any questions or comments. Okay, you all have a safe and wonderful day. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna,
Hare
Jai
Krishna.
Shri